Welcome to Luke, where we're going to take a look at one of the longest Gospels, in fact, the longest Gospel, from a writer who wrote more of the New Testament than any other writer. Luke just wrote slightly more of the New Testament than Paul. And even though Paul has more pieces that contribute to the New Testament, between Luke and Acts, we get almost 1/3 of the New Testament in front of us. Luke also is an orphan among the Gospels, but it's of extreme importance because it has more parables than the other Gospel, it discusses more ethics than the other Gospel, and the connection to the early church through the sequel in Acts gives it a perspective that no other combination of books in the New Testament gives to us. It's an orphan because in the early church, to begin with, Matthew and John, as the apostolically associated Gospels, were most regarded and most widely circulated. And then later, much later in fact, when scholars judged that Mark was the first of the Gospels written, or at least most likely to be the first of the Gospels written, it assumed a new importance, which left Luke in its orphan status. Nonetheless, as an orphan, it supplies so much of the teaching of Jesus and so much of the ethical perspective of Jesus that it offers us a rich look at what it is that Jesus' ministry was about. So I'm thrilled you want to be a part of a journey through Luke, this wonderful gospel written by a figure who was a doctor and a researcher. When we take our look at the first 4 verses, soon you will see the kind of research that he engaged in. He brought his medical background to this discussion. We know what we know about Luke from Colossians 4, where there's a discussion of Luke in the midst of a discussion of many of those who were sometimes companions of Paul. The date of this gospel is somewhere most likely before AD 70 in the destruction of the temple. That date is tied to the Gospel of Mark because we think that Luke used Mark, as well as the view one takes about the Olivet Discourse and the way in which it offers a prediction of the destruction of Jerusalem. Some people put Luke in the 80s. That's possible, but they might do it for the wrong reason, which is the suggestion that Jesus somehow didn't utter the predictions of the Olivet Discourse, and Luke has put those predictions in his mouth. That's very, very unlikely to take place. Jesus, because he knew the Old Testament and knew that covenantal unfaithfulness would lead to judgment by the nations on people, God's people in the land, understood what the risk for Israel was in rejecting the Messiah, and in the midst of doing that, predicted how Jerusalem would fall, and of course Jerusalem would fall if it was the Romans who did it in the way the Romans normally took cities, which was to put cities under siege and wait until they collapsed and then come in and wreak the destruction that Romans did when they overtook a city. None of that requires a special knowledge by Jesus, just a good theological lens through which to look through. And so for that reason, dating Luke after the destruction because of this prediction is not a direction to go. So we're probably in the early to mid-60s in terms of when this was written. What is it that Luke is trying to achieve? He's trying to lay the groundwork for the reconciliation between peoples, between Jew and Gentile, and the salvation view that is corporate, not just individual. He's explaining how salvation is for all people. It's for all people in pulling them together. And the Jews and the Gentiles had a very problematic history. The Maccabean War, which had taken place in 167 to 164 BC, was an attempt by Gentiles, by Syrians actually, to wipe Judaism off the face of the earth. And the sense of estrangement was huge. Yet the gospel was saying God, in reconciling individual people to himself, is also reconciling groups to themselves so that the church becomes Jew and Gentile in one body. Ephesians chapter 2 tells us this. And in that reconciliation is part of the corporate work that God is doing. There's also something else that God is doing, and that is he is pulling together these estranged groups into this unit that he has made, this new unit in Christ. And in doing that, he's showing that part of the purpose of salvation is not just to affect our individual relationship with God, but our relationship to one another. Finally, another important thing is that Luke is writing for a new religious movement in an era in which religion was respected because of its age, not because of its newness. It's unlike our modern world. In the modern world, we want to have, Microsoft Word 2022 and 2021. In the ancient world with religion, what's old is better. So you had this new boy on the block, and you need to explain how this new boy on the block is actually quite old. So one of the things Luke is going to do in his gospel is to show how the exercise of Jesus' ministry is part of a program and a plan that God had from long ago, dating back all the way to David and all the way back to Abraham and covenantal commitments that God made long ago. So what appears to be new is actually quite old. This plan of bringing Jew and Gentile together in one body is something that God designed from long ago. And so what looks to be new is actually quite old. It's part of a program that God has in mind. This mixture of Jew and Gentile, which would be, from a social point of view in that time, controversial and unusual, was part of what God was doing to bring humanity back together, not just with the living God, but to bring humanity back together in relationship to one another at the same time.